Welcome back to Occupy the Media. Thanks for staying with us. To join the conversation, call us with a question or comment. The call is free, 877-575-FSTV, or post a comment on our Facebook or Twitter page. So by now you know the story. Wall Street gambled and lost big, and taxpayers were left holding the bill. Now the government is trying to make rules to make sure it can't happen again. But Marcy, the Occupy the SEC is out there looking into the what's going on in the dark halls of the Securities Exchange Commission to make sure that the rules are, as they're being implemented, are going to be followed.
Yeah, you've got a lot of lobbyists who have come out and tried to poke holes in this rule. This Volcker rule in particular is what they were looking at. That really is written to defend, the rest of us and those of us that bank with big banks, essentially. I had a chance to sit down with someone from Occupy the SEC, Akshat, and we talked a little bit more about what Occupy the SEC was doing. Okay, well, let's watch that. It's your interview with Akshat Tiwari. So let's watch it. Akshat, thanks so much for being with us today. I want to talk about the letter that Occupy the SEC delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission several days ago. But first, let's talk about Occupy the SEC as a whole. How did this group first get to be formed?
Well, the group got formed around October, November of last year. It's basically me and several other people that were interested in banking reform. We coalesced around the Volcker Rule, which is being implemented by the SEC, as you mentioned, and several of the banking regulators.
Now, my understanding is that there were some lobbyists that were going up to challenge the Volcker Rule, to try to water it down a little bit. Why is it important to understand this? How does it affect the average Joe?
Well, the Volcker Rule, if properly implemented, would be similar to the old Glass-Steagall Act from the 1930s, which basically reduced the amount of risk-taking that government-supported banks can take. So basically, if you have a checking account, that money that you're depositing in the bank can be used by banks at present for the banks to do what's called proprietary trading, which is basically gambling with your money. And if they make money off of that money, then they're not giving you any of that money. They're keeping it for themselves. Whereas if they lose all their money and they go under, then they're going to ask the government for a bailout. Mm-hmm. So the Volcker Rule tries to address that.
Okay. So now talk a little bit about this letter that you delivered and the action that happened around that. I know you and other folks from Occupy the SEC actually went down to the SEC when they had an open sort of meeting. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we had a meeting with the SEC. It was actually a conference call. Initially, our objective was just to try to understand some of the nuances of the rule. Ultimately, we submitted our letter. It's a 325-page letter, very detailed. Our next objective is to actually go down to DC and try to advocate certain components of our letter to the agencies.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And that was an interview with Akshat Tiwari with Occupy the SEC. And real quickly, Marcy, where can people go to follow all the things that Occupy the SEC is doing to make sure that the Volcker Rule and some of these other financial reform measures are actually put into place? Yeah, their website is occupythesec.org. Okay, so we actually have a bunch of callers on the line, so let's go forward and take some of them. We have Jerry from Michigan with a comment. You're on Occupy the Media.
Thank you. Yes, I'm calling in regard to the most important, what I think is the most important issue facing the humanity at this time. All people who are watching, you must watch the documentary The Secret of Oz by Libertarian presidential candidate Bill Still. This is a history of central banking and the Federal Reserve in our country and about central banking around the world. Government or countries must print their own money. There should be no more private banks printing money ever again.
And so, Jerry, you saw the interview about Occupy the SEC. What's your opinion, or do you have a comment about the financial reform and the Volcker Rule?
Frankly, I was on hold. I didn't get to hear it, but I'm sure that this would probably connect with this documentary, The Secret of Oz, as well.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot for your call, Jerry. So, Don,
yes.
The issues around financial reform and this fear that kind of our financial fate of the entire globe is being dictated by the elite. That concern spans the political spectrum.
Absolutely. It's a concern of both Republicans and Democrats, a concern of moderates as well. The untrammeled, you might say, power of corporations to write the rules that are supposed to regulate Wall Street, the way Wall Street conducts its business. The legions, the armies of lobbyists on K Street, high-paid lobbyists, are there precisely to prevent that from happening.
And Don, actually, let's move on and take another call because we want to get through them. We have Brian from New York with a question. Brian, you're on Occupy the Media.
Well, my question, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good, how are you doing?
My question is, why does Citizens United, slimy and as terrible as it is, make things any different than they were before? Doesn't Citizens United just reveal the raw reality that power and wealth has always resided with the capitalist elite unless they're confronted by sufficiently powerful mass movements that can sometimes eke out a few transformations, sometimes some significant transformations. And
okay, well, Brian, that's a really interesting comment, and we're running out of time, Don. But do you want to?
I think he's absolutely right. He's dead on with his comment. I also want to just commend the young people from Occupy the SEC, many of whom worked on Wall Street, many of whom are trained lawyers, economists, financial experts, security analysts. They've come together in sympathy with the principles and the demands of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
It certainly does seem they know their stuff. And
they wrote a 350-page letter to the SEC.
325 pages.
325 pages. And you've read every page, right?
They know.
Of course.
They know what they're talking about.
All right. So we asked our Facebook and Twitter followers to give us their 2 cents. Are the SEC and other government agencies doing enough to protect your money from Wall Street banksters? Here are some of the comments we've gotten so far. Rochelle wrote, "Absolutely not. They don't care about the 99%. Onward, Occupy." Jim wrote in with, "Of course not. The cash kings of the 1% own the U.S." And then Allison wrote to us and said, "They are doing a great job of protecting the money handlers, but not the laborers." Well, that's all the time we have for this week, but the conversations are continuing in the streets and online on Twitter and Facebook. Check it out. Thanks for joining us today. We will see you next time on Occupy the Media.